Hi everyone, and welcome back to this week's pro tip. This week I'm going to be discussing a little bit about the differences of whites for oil painters. I'm sure you've seen all of the different whites on the market, and if you're like I was when I was first starting out, I was like, what do all these mean? I mean, white is white, right? Yes, white is white, but they behave differently, and so that's why we have different whites for oil painters. So starting with the one that most people have, which is titanium white. Titanium white is the most opaque of all of the whites. It has the highest tinting power, and it reflects about 97% of light, which makes it really good for impressionist work and getting like a nice bright white. It has a very soft, buttery consistency, which makes it a pleasure to use. Next up is Flake White. Flake White is a traditional lead white. The lead is a problem, though. Obviously, it is a toxic substance, so it is poisonous if ingested or if thinned out and put on your skin. It's also poisonous to the environment, so if you're using Flake White, please be very mindful of how you dispose of any kind of Flake White. But how it works, it's very flexible, it's very durable, it's really good for cooler colors, and it reflects about 93 to 95% of light. It can be, actually it is, it's very cakey and it's very stiff, much like the Zinc White is. So if you happen to buy your Flake White or your Zinc White and it's the first time you've ever used it and you squeeze it out and you're thinking, I think they sent me an old tube of paint. No, this is really just how it is. It's very dry, it's very cakey, it's very stiff, so it can be hard to mix with your other colors, but that's the way it's supposed to be. So, for your Zinc White, it is the least opaque of all of the whites. It's very good for tinting and glazing, with about 1/10 of the tinting strength of the titanium white. It's very good for transparent fabrics. The only downside that I see to the Zinc White is that it is very brittle. So it is not a very flexible paint, and flexibility of paint is literally the flexibility of paint. So if you think about having your paint on your paint on a canvas, but not with the wooden surroundings, so it's just a floppy piece of canvas. The way you can move that canvas is the flexibility of your paint. Is it going to crack, or is it going to withstand the flexibility of, how you move that piece of canvas? So that's what is referred to when we talk about flexibility of paint. So the next one that we have is titanium zinc, which is obviously a mixture of the titanium and the zinc. This is as the titanium is, it's a very nice, buttery, soft paint to work with, very, very easy, but it has medium tinting strength. So it can take down your color a little more step by step by step, rather than the titanium white, which takes it all the way down very fast with very little white. The zinc is very, very good if you're just trying to take things down slowly, 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 slowly. If you don't immediately want to go down to a pastel. Other paints that I do not have in my collection are transparent white, which is pretty obvious. It's for tinting. It's got a very, very low tinting strength, and it's really good for glazing. And also, if you're doing portraiture, it's very good for getting sort of a transparency to the skin. If you don't like to use the titanium and the other ones, which can kind of give a sort of cakey, chalky appearance sometimes to portraiture. And last but not least is Cremins White, which is sort of the original white. It's a true lead-based paint. There is no zinc in it, so that means it's even cakier and even stiffer, and it has a tendency to be stringy. It's most natural to the eye, so they say. I personally have never used Cremins White. I haven't found a need to do so, you can check it out and see how it works for you. But again, be mindful of how you dispose of that one as well. If you are really interested in trying out a Flake White, they also make Flake Hue. A number of different manufacturers make a Flake White, and the names vary, so if you find a brand that you're really in love with, just see if they have a Flake Hue or something that is a non-lead Flake White. Anyway, that is all of the whites, the basic whites that are on the market. So let's see how they behave in real time, shall we? Come on. I will start with some French blue here, just to have something to mix in to everything. So we have 5 actually different whites because I actually ended up finding a transparent white in my box, which I had totally forgotten that I purchased. So here we have essentially the same amount of French blue 5 different times. So we'll start with the titanium white. Now, right off, you'll see that the titanium white is actually really smooth in consistency. It's very buttery. It spreads very, very easily. So the French blue on its own is just about as buttery as the titanium white. So if we just mix that in really quickly, we see it's really, really easy to mix. It's very nice. It blends very quickly. The marbling disappears quite fast, and we are brought down to a nice sort of sky blue color. Really, really, really pretty. Okay, so secondly, we'll try the Flake White. And I'll put it up here now. So now you see it's a little harder to squeeze out. It's definitely more cakey. And if you see here, it's thicker. You see it doesn't like spread as easily as the titanium white does. And it's even got, I don't know if you can see this, a certain sort of, I don't want to say granular consistency, but there's definitely, it's not as smooth as the titanium white. So let's see what kind of a different color we get here, mixing with the Flake White. Now again, it blends really, really nicely, so I like that about it. And again, if you'll see, hopefully you'll be able to see this. There's a certain texture sort of to it that the titanium doesn't really have, it's kind of interesting. And also you'll see that this is a darker pigment than this one is when it's all said and done. Now moving on to Zinc White. Zinc White, again, it's got a thicker consistency, again more cakey, but not quite as cakey as the Flake. It's sort of more of an in-between consistency, I think, between the Flake White and the titanium white. So it's still very nice. It doesn't quite have as much of that granular sort of thing happening here, but let's see. This is how it blends. And we're getting something pretty close to the Flake White as far as the intensity of the color that we have. I would say definitely that the zinc is keeping it just slightly darker than the Flake White. I used relatively the same amount of paint. I'm not really gonna measure it out in like weight or anything like that, but you get the point. So we have so far a darker, not quite a middle shade, it's just a little bit lighter, and then a lighter version here with the titanium white. So now moving to the transparent white that I totally forgot that I had. We are going to see how that behaves. Now I've only ever used this one time, so I can't honestly tell you that much about it, where it compares with the Zinc White. I felt like they sort of behaved the same way. This one is actually really, it's much smoother, and again, it doesn't have that sort of granular, I don't know how else to put it. It's not like there's little greeny bits in there or anything like that, but it's just not super smooth like the titanium white. So this one is actually much smoother like the titanium white. And we see that this is performing very similarly to the Zinc White, actually. Actually, I kind of, yeah. You know, I have to say, if I had to choose between the zinc and the transparent white, I would probably go with the transparent white. I like the smoothness. It's much more buttery than the zinc is. It's good stuff as far as I'm concerned, and it gives the same chroma as the, or same intensity I should say, as the Zinc White does. Okay, so the last one that I have is the Titanium Zinc White. And again, this doesn't squeeze out quite as well as the Titanium White. And actually I think I put a little bit too much there, so keeping it even. So you can see that this is sort of like a consistency of the transparent white. Maybe not quite as buttery, but you know, pretty close. So let's take this and see what kind of color we get. Okay, so we get something very, very close to the Flake White in the color here. In terms of what is the most buttery, definitely the Titanium White. I think second most would be the Transparent White, and third would be the Titanium Zinc White. The Flake and the Zinc are pretty much similar, I would say, in consistency. But definitely the Flake White is sort of the hardest kind of to work with. You will probably need some kind of a medium to use this as you would some of the other whites. It's very, I don't want to call it spackle, but it sort of has that consistency to it. Whereas this is, you know, really nice and runny. You can spread it and you can move it around, and you know, it's going to come down to our personal preference. I sort of tend to prefer things to be a little more buttery because I find things get really harder to work with the harder they are. So that's why I you know, prefer that over more of a cakey thing. But you know, I think there's a time and a place for everything. So hopefully this illustrated how all of the different whites work and what kind of intensity that you can get from them. Again, you can definitely see that the Titanium White will take down the color to more of a pastel than all the others do. So I hope that was helpful. I think that's about all you need to know about these oil paints. If you are just starting out and you're wondering which one is going to be best, and you're on a budget and you don't want to spend, you know, all the money on a bunch of different whites, I would definitely start with the Titanium White. I think it's kind of the go-to white. It's very helpful, and you could kind of, you know, get a lot of the other effects with Titanium White depending on how you use it. As you progress in your art journey, I would definitely recommend getting some Flake and Zinc. And some people actually just like to go with the Titanium Zinc for their general use as well. So I would go with either the Titanium or the Titanium Zinc. So additionally, I would just like to add that white can be very stark. So I always recommend toning your whites just a little bit, like so tiny bit you don't even really realize that you have changed the white, but it is definitely not a stark, bright white. There are occasions for using stark, bright white, such as reflections on glass, reflections in the eye, you know, things of that nature, and just not, you know, sort of a lot of it, because it can, like I said, look a little sterile and stark, so that's just something good to keep in mind. So I think that's about it for all of the different whites and what they do. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them below in the comment section, and I will get back to you with an answer. And that does it for this week's pro tip. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you again next week. Until then, have a fantastic week, everyone. See you later.